Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. With the price of just about everything going up during inflation, we thought we'd bring our prices down. So to help us, we brought in a reverse auctioneer, which is apparently a thing.
Mint Mobile Unlimited Premium Wireless. How to get 30, 30, bit to get 30, bit to get 20, 20, 20, bit to get 20, 20, bit to get 15, 15, 15, 15, just $15 a month? Sold!
Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 up front for 3 months plus taxes and fees. Promo rate for new customers for limited time. Unlimited more than 40 gigabytes per month. Slows full terms at mintmobile.com.
Want to teach your kids financial literacy, but not sure where to start? Greenlight can help. With Greenlight, parents can keep an eye on kids' spending and saving, while kids and teens use a card of their own to build money confidence. As a parent, you can send instant money transfers, set up chores, automate allowance, and more. It's a convenient way to run your household, customized to your family's needs, and the easy way to raise financially smart kids. Get started with Greenlight today and get your first month free at greenlight.com/Spotify.
Josh, give me a word to describe the last week in the Middle East.
Knife edge, I'd say.
Josh Keating covers foreign policy over at Vox.
I mean, since October, there's been this sort of question looming over both the conflict and the U.S. response to it, as to whether the war in Gaza would spiral into a sort of larger regional conflict. And I wouldn't say we're quite there yet, but I would say nobody is taking any actions that are making that less likely right now.
I called Josh up to explain a week that has gone from bad to worse between Israel and its neighbors.
Children were playing football here, and then a rocket hit.
As the conflict in Gaza raged on, a rocket killed 12 children and young adults near the border with Lebanon.
Israel says the rocket strike happened in the Israeli-occupied Golan Heights. Israel is blaming Hezbollah. The group denied the accusation.
Within a day, Israel retaliated with a strike inside Beirut.
This is what Israeli retaliation looks like. Beirut's densely populated southern Dahya neighborhood showered in debris following a precision strike by Israeli fighter jets.
The world is watching what happens next as fears rise that an all-out war could erupt on Israel's northern border. We're just learning.
And all this was quickly followed by a strike inside Iran. This attack took down a leader of Hamas, a key negotiator in ceasefire talks.
Good morning. Well, the Middle East is really on the brink of a major escalation following the 2 assassinations carried out by Israel, really in just a matter of hours. Now, one of the men killed Ismail.
As recently as a couple months ago, you were writing that Israel and Hezbollah especially were trying to keep their fighting contained. This week seemed to be the opposite of that. What happened?
The strange thing is I would still say that.
Huh. Even now?
Even now. I mean, even today, you very quickly saw statements from Israeli officials saying they don't seek a wider war. But it's very contradictory in that they are taking these actions that make that much more likely.
It's funny. For the last few months, I feel like we keep saying that the whole region in the Middle East is about to explode. When do we just say...
It's exploded?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so, look at events that, I mean, not just these. We also saw, I believe it was last week, Israel carried out airstrikes in Yemen. The situation in the West Bank is very tense. It's pretty widespread right now.
So is the region at war?
Is the region at war? I mean, the region, yes and no. I mean, it can always get worse, is the thing.
Today on the show, why the news keeps getting grimmer in the Middle East. I'm Mary Harris. You're listening to What Next? Stick around. This show is brought to you by Public. If you are looking for simple yet sophisticated investing, Public.com says click on over and check them out. From stocks to options, bonds to crypto, it is all there. You can even earn an industry-leading 5.1% APY on your cash. Public is trusted by millions of investors, and NerdWallet just gave Public 4.6 stars and calls it an impressive experience. Sign up in 2 minutes at public.com. All your investing in one place. This is a paid advertisement for Public Investing, 5.1% APY as of June 17th, 2024, and is subject to change. NerdWallet overall rating 4.6 out of 5 as of May 2024. Full disclosures in the podcast description. This episode is brought to you by SAP. First, the bad news. SAP Business AI will not help you generate cubist versions of your family's holiday photos, but it will help you understand which supplier is best to help you roll out your plant-based packaging in Southeast Asia, or identify the training your junior project manager needs to rise up the ranks, or automate repetitive tasks while you focus on big innovations. So you can be ready for the next opportunity. Revolutionary technology, real-world results. That's SAP Business AI. Okay, so we're speaking on Wednesday, July 31st, and I want to say that because things are changing so quickly in the region. But I'm wondering if we can start this conversation by talking about what just happened, which is one of Hamas's key leaders has been seemingly assassinated while on a visit to Iran. Can you just give me the basics? Like, who is Ismail Haniyeh?
Yeah, so Ismail Haniyeh, he was 62 years old, grew up in a refugee camp in Gaza, was one of the founding members of Hamas in the 1980s, one of the more kind of junior founding members, but, rose through the ranks and was actually briefly the prime minister of the Palestinian Authority after Hamas won Palestinian elections in 2006. He hasn't lived in Gaza since 2019.
He's usually in Qatar, right?
He's usually in Qatar. And so he's been the kind of political international face of Hamas.
Can I ask what a political leader of Hamas does?
So in terms of these ceasefire negotiations that have been ongoing with Israel, like those are happening with the political leadership of Hamas, which is based outside of Gaza. So, in terms of, operational command of the group carrying out attacks and combat actions, he's not the one directly involved in that. So if you want to talk about what impact this will have on Hamas going forward, in terms of its military operations, probably not that much. He wasn't the one sort of directly involved in that. It's going to have a huge political impact because, these ceasefire negotiations are still going on. And there's actually the Qatari foreign minister made a comment on Twitter earlier this morning saying, how can you have negotiations when one side is killing the other side's negotiator?
Yeah. I mean, Haniyeh was designated a specially designated global terrorist by the Trump administration, but he also traveled. He was a bit of a diplomat for Hamas. How unusual is that?
Right. So, I mean, it speaks to this sort of weird hybrid organization that Hamas is, where it's both a terrorist group as well as a political party and the de facto government of Gaza. So it sort of operates on several different levels. And he would travel to Turkey, he's traveled to Iran, other Hamas leaders have traveled to Russia. He's met with Bashar al-Assad in Syria. So no, he's not visiting Europe or the United States, but he does sort of operate out of the shadows.
So Haniyeh was in Iran, where he was killed, to meet that country's new president, who was being inaugurated this week. Representatives from Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, they were all there. How big of a deal is it that he was apparently assassinated there, as opposed to in Qatar or anywhere else? To me, it looks like a real middle finger to Iran.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would imagine Iran is going to feel pressure to retaliate in some ways. So Iran's new president, Masoud Pezeshkian, is thought of as somewhat of a moderate. And, there were people writing, just a few days ago that his coming to power perhaps provided sort of an opening for an improvement in U.S.-Iran relationships, or at least a way to sort of get some kind of back-channel diplomacy back on track and help sort of contain some of the tensions that are boiling over in the region. I think that's going to be a lot harder right now. Iran is going to feel pressure to retaliate against Israel. And, we very quickly today saw Secretary of State Antony Blinken say that the U.S. had no prior knowledge of the operation that killed Haniyeh, but Iranian officials are still going to be blaming the U.S. for it.
I mean, the people claiming Israel is behind this killing are Iran's Revolutionary Guard, right? And Hamas. Should we be taking that with a grain of salt? Or is there no one else who would want this assassination done?
No, I think it's fairly safe assumption that this was an Israeli operation. And it's worth noting that, this is not the first time Israel has pretty clearly carried out assassination operations on Iranian soil. It's usually not this high profile a target, but this is not unheard of for them.
You've mentioned that really it's negotiations for a ceasefire in Gaza that may be seriously affected by this assassination. I'm wondering if we can talk about how.
Well, only last week you had U.S. officials saying fairly confidently that they felt we were pretty close to a ceasefire, that there were only technical details needed to be worked out, that the two sides were basically on the same page, had moved on some core demands. Perhaps the really optimistic take is you could say that, that Hamas may, after seeing this happen, assume that it's in their best interest to cut a deal fast and preserve what's left of their command structure. I mean, there has been some reporting that the sort of heavy damage they've taken is one thing that sort of prompted them to shift on some of their more maximalist demands. But on the other hand, I think they're going to feel a need for some kind of face-saving action to, not look as if they were forced by, the killing of their senior leader into cutting a deal with Israel. In a lot of ways, like the actual details of the implementation of the deal are less effective than the core question of whether either side really wants to stop fighting. And I think on Hamas's side, there's good reason for doubt. And then on the Israeli side, if you listened to Prime Minister Netanyahu's speech to Congress last week, in which he basically, said that, Israel would have to maintain some degree of security control over Gaza, which is probably a non-starter for any ceasefire talks. There's good reason to doubt whether the Israelis actually want this either. So we can get a little hung up on the details and whether each side is sort of ceding ground on different positions. But, it's ultimately a question of political will. One or both sides has to actually want to stop fighting. And it's not clear to me that that's the case.
We'll be right back after a quick break. This episode is brought to you by SAP. First, the bad news. SAP Business AI will not help you generate cubist versions of your family's holiday photos, but it will help you understand which supplier is best to help you roll out your plant-based packaging in Southeast Asia, or identify the training your junior project manager needs to rise up the ranks, or automate repetitive tasks while you focus on big innovations. So you can be ready for the next opportunity. Revolutionary technology, real-world results. That's SAP Business AI. This show is brought to you by Discover. Have you heard about Doublenomics? It's okay if you haven't. It's extremely niche and practiced by Discover. Here's an example. Discover automatically doubles the cash back earned on your credit card at the end of your first year with Cashback Match. That means with Discover, you could turn $150 cash back into $300. It pays to Discover. See terms at discover.com/creditcard. Okay, I want to widen the lens here and talk about the context in which Ismail Haniyeh's death took place. And by that I mean the escalating fighting between Hezbollah and Israel. Hezbollah is, of course, an ally of Hamas and has been firing on Israel from Lebanon as a show of solidarity and also to distract Israeli forces from Gaza. But these two groups have not been technically at war, right?
They never declared war since October 8th. So literally from almost the very beginning of the Gaza war, there's been, exchange of missile, rocket, drone fire between Hezbollah and IDF across the Israeli-Lebanese border and to some extent across the Israeli-Syrian border as well. This has forced massive dislocation on both sides. There are, hundreds of thousands of people on both sides of the border who've had to evacuate their homes. That's an ongoing issue. At what point, at least until Israel moved into Rafah, I think there are actually more IDF troops on the northern border than there were operating in Gaza. So, and there's definitely elements within the Israeli security establishment who I think actually view Hezbollah as the bigger threat than Hamas.
Why is that?
More advanced weaponry, more combat training, more troops. They've fought a devastating war already. They have acquired a great deal of combat experience fighting on behalf of the Assad regime in Syria. So this is a more capable adversary that, in theory, actually has the ability to do a lot more damage to Israel, to inflict a lot more military damage on Israeli targets, both civilian and military, than Hamas had.
So on Saturday, things took this turn. There was a rocket attack that killed 12 children in Israel. It was the worst attack inside Israel since October 7th. And Israel immediately blamed Hezbollah, although Hezbollah denied that this was them, right? Is that a credible denial?
Yeah, I can remember talking to experts earlier in this conflict being like, what would lead to an all-out war? And it was, something that killed a lot of civilians. I remember, I forget who I was talking to, but one expert I talked to even gave the example of, a strike on a daycare or something that killed a lot of children would be something Israel would have to respond to. And that's more or less what happened.
When you saw that it happened, it sounds like you immediately were like, oh no, this is what the experts have been warning about.
I mean, this is the question that I keep asking people and that you asked me earlier is, at what point do we call this the all-out war that we've been afraid of? And I think it really is a sort of ground invasion by either side on the other one's territory, which we haven't seen yet. I think from Israel's point of view, there are definitely some more hawkish views who think it might be time for another conflict to sort of push Hezbollah back from the border. But, there's questions about whether Israel can fight on two fronts at once. So they may not be in a position to fight this war, even if they did want to. But we do keep moving further and further up the escalation ladder.
Yeah. I mean, on Tuesday, Prime Minister Netanyahu promised severe consequences for this alleged Hezbollah strike. And then later that day, there was news of an attack inside Lebanon.
Israel launched a strike against Hezbollah Tuesday in Lebanon's capital city of Beirut. The Israeli military says the strike was in response to a weekend attack that killed 12 children and teenagers in the Israeli-controlled Golan Heights. CBS News.
You see these two attacks happen at the same time, the one in Beirut and the one in Tehran, and you think it must be some sort of coordinated sort of offensive. And I actually think in this case, that's not what it was. I think it's sort of two different things that strangely happened at the same time. So I think the attack in Beirut on Tuesday, which killed Fuad Shukr, who's a senior Hezbollah commander, I think that was direct retaliation. Whereas, Haniyeh, that doesn't seem like that's a direct response to an action by Hezbollah. It seems more like this was a target of opportunity that presented itself.
But still, there's something about all of these things piling up at once. The rocket attack on Israel totally claiming credit for killing a Hezbollah commander in Beirut, And then Wednesday morning, Iran pointing the finger at Israel, saying they killed a top Hamas leader there. It feels connected. I know it may not. I know that some things may not be, but it just feels like a lot all at once.
And then you have to look at what's happening internally in Israel as well. On Monday, we also saw an incident where there had been some IDF troops who were detained in Israel for allegedly abusing Palestinian prisoners, and a group of far-right activists, including members of the Knesset, stormed the prison and later the military court where they were being held in scenes that were, at least to Americans, almost look reminiscent of January 6th. The Israeli military actually had to pull some units who were supposed to go into Gaza to control that situation, to control, a security situation from Israeli citizens within Israel.
This all feels chaotic to me.
It's extremely chaotic. And honestly, I think it's this sort of doom loop we're in where I think as long as the war in Gaza continues, it's going to keep spinning off all these side conflicts. I mean, it's pretty clear Hezbollah, as much as they might not want an all-out war with Israel, they're going to continue these rocket attacks as long as the war between Hamas and Israel and in Gaza continues. I think that there's no hope of ending the northern situation until Gaza ends. But, these actions taken in Beirut and in Tehran yesterday probably make a ceasefire in Gaza less likely. So these things are kind of feeding each other in a real vicious cycle.
Yeah, it's so interesting to think of all these things together because it just makes me wonder, who isn't Israel fighting with? Israel's fighting internally. Israel's fighting in Lebanon, in Iran, with Hezbollah, in Gaza. There are so many fights going on all at the same time.
What started just as a war in Gaza, as devastating as that had been, it's just spiraled out into all these different webs. I mean, you look at the Houthis in Yemen, you look at militias in Iraq and Syria attacking U.S. troops, Hezbollah, of course, Iran, and we saw in recent days the President Erdogan of Turkey threaten sort of vaguely that Turkey may have to enter the conflict in some ways. But the sort of guardrails that existed to prevent, sort of regional conflagration are really not looking as sturdy as they were.
Not to bring it all back to the U.S., but how can and should the U.S. respond here? It just seems like one of our most steadfast allies is in a real mess right now.
There were reports a few days ago that the U.S. was trying to restrain Israel's response from the attack in Golan and try to, have them calibrate it into
the Hezbollah
attack into something more limited. I don't know if they consider this bombing in Beirut to be limited, but and we've also seen Secretary of Defense Austin say in recent days that if Hezbollah were to get into an all-out war with Israel, that the U.S. would defend Israel. So I think part of this is self-interest too, where the U.S. doesn't want to have to get even more deeply involved in this conflict. And of course, this is an election year, as I'm sure your listeners are very well aware. And I don't think the Biden administration would like to be sort of even more deeply militarily involved in this conflict. So they're trying to keep it contained. And it's this strange dynamic where right after Netanyahu gave that speech to Congress last week, there was a senior administration official did a call with reporters and was obviously asked for, a response to the things Netanyahu said, which seemed to indicate he was not particularly interested in the ceasefire deal that was on the table. And the official basically said, "Oh, we weren't listening to that speech. We were in the Situation Room dealing with more important things." So it's this weird dynamic now where it's the U.S. keeps insisting that there's progress being made on a ceasefire deal and are still saying that they believe there's a diplomatic solution to be found. And I think increasingly saying that requires just sort of brushing off the actual statements that are being made and the actual actions that are being taken.
While we've been talking, Israel's military has been saying it's preparing for combat in the northern arena of Israel. So that area that borders Lebanon, where Hezbollah is operating. It says it's practicing for a variety of extreme scenarios, including combat in a built-up area. That sounds a whole lot like code for ground war to me.
The only note of caution I'd add there is that, there have been officials, particularly Defense Minister Gallant, has been sort of making statements that it may be necessary to, launch a ground war for months now, like since very early in the conflict. So I'd say the rhetoric is definitely not new, but, it would be absurdly optimistic to say that the risk of that war hasn't increased.
Josh, I'm really grateful for your time and your reporting. Thanks for coming on the show.
All right. Thank you, Mary.
Josh Keating covers foreign policy over at Vox. He is writing about the latest in the Middle East. Go on over to Vox.com to check it out.
Dear citizens of Israel, good evening.
Wednesday afternoon, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu delivered a televised address. In it, he said Israel had dealt crushing blows to Hamas and Hezbollah, but he notably did not mention Iran.
Every week, people tell me, both in and outside of Israel, finish the war because we've exhausted whatever we can achieve and it's impossible to win the war. But I did not give in to these voices then, and I do not give in to them today as well.
All right, that's our show. What Next is produced by Paige Osburn, Elena Schwartz, Rob Gunther, Madeline Ducharme, and Anna Phillips. We are led by Alicia Montgomery, with a little boost from Susan Matthews. Ben Richmond is the Senior Director of Podcast Operations here at Slate. And I'm Mary Harris. Thanks for listening. I'll catch you back here next time.
Does your morning toast taste more like cardboard than bread? Then you haven't tried America's #1 organic bread, Dave's Killer Bread. Visit daveskillerbread.com to learn more and look for them in the bread aisle of your local grocery store. Dave's Killer Bread, bread amplified.